Servus YouTube, Chef here, cooked up another spicy build, this time Ailment. And oh boy, can I tell you, this is a confusing one. I thought Ailment damage scales with total damage, but it actually does not. The only thing that increases Ailment is anything that states increased damage or increased Ailment damage. So with that in mind, we pick up any of these and scale our damage ticks to insane heights of 11k, and we apply 2 of those ailments, so we double that. We have some nice DPS in this build, but we also have even more buffs to keep track of, so hitting those 11k is pretty difficult. I'd say this is the most mechanically intense gameplay I've had so far. The most important thing is to keep up our Immortal Offering stacks. You can see those above our potion slots. The number 5 on it means we recently killed an enemy with 5 stacks of the corresponding element. I went over ailments in my advanced guide if you want to have more details, but to summarize. The type of ailment we apply is determined by our highest damaging element. With the passive node Grievous Afflictions, we apply ailments of our 2 highest damaging elements. Our chance to apply a stack is determined by our status ailment chance score. We increase stacks applied per proc through gear and passives. On gear, as always, we are using the Manic Slaughter on helmet and chest because it's just broken. This is way overtuned, giving us 350% increased damage, which also scales ailments. Weapon and offhand are dagger and catalyst, so we can cast our spells. Gonna go over that in detail in the item section. Skills, I'm using Autoturret to apply poison and bleed because our highest attack damage is toxic and rend. Arctic Spear with sacred conversion to apply weakness. Winter's Grasp converted into shadow damage to apply curse. Spells also apply shock because our second highest spell damage is lightning. Preferably you go sacred spell damage on gear, so you don't need to convert your frost damage to sacred on Arctic Spear, so you would still apply freeze. Really helps out with survivability, but I lack the perfect gear for that. Next up, Mark of Impurity because it increases ailment damage by a ton. And lastly, my favorite, Ether Jump. This also applies stasis. There are 2 skill modifiers on here that apply stasis. We are running both. I'm gonna explain why in the skill section. This build is very flexible though. There are a lot of possible skills and item choices. But yeah, let's go over in detail what I'm using in the items, skills, attributes, and passive sections. Items. Like I said, helmet and chest with damage per unspent reach is the most important. Maximum roll on these are 9%. Weapon I'm using is the Addict for toxic damage to attacks and increased poison damage. If you need more rend, you can also run a normal dagger with rend damage on it. It's important that our highest attack damage is toxic and rend, so equip what you need. Keep in mind that the flat damage does not matter for ailment damage. Offhand with Catalyst, the only damage increase we can get on here are attributes, so I'm going with one that has 3 support sockets. If you roll enough sacred damage to spells on this and accessories, then you don't need to convert Ice Spear into sacred. And then you would still be able to apply freeze, which would be preferred since the crowd control helps with survivability. Accessories, from most important to least, a minimum of +4 ailment stacks applied, because then we always have at least 5 stacks for our Immortal Offering. Then flat toxic and rend damage to attacks, to make those 2 our highest damage type for the turret skill. All attributes plus socket. Attributes give us increased damage which scales ailments. Increased maximum resource, comboing with Manic Slaughter, and last, flat sacred damage to spells. Like I said, if you have enough, then you don't need to convert Arctic Spear. Shoulders and gloves, the only damage increase we can get on here is attributes, preferably wisdom, and all resistance score because it combos with our passive retaliator. Gems, if you're using a weapon with slots, then you can use amber to increase your toxic and rend damage, so you need less on accessories. Defensive slots Silverstone for more physical rest to increase damage. And support slots with also Silverstone, since the total of 40 attributes gives us more damage. Skills. I will explain the reason why I'm not going for burn and shock in the passive section. There are some weird interactions with scaling on elemental ailments. So our main skill is Turret, which applies poison and bleed because our gear gives us toxic and rend damage to attacks. The skill itself doesn't deal a lot of damage, so the modifiers are only focused on shooting more often. with twin repeater and ballistic reinforcements. I'm also using autonomous sensors, so I can just put it down and not worry about it where I'm aiming it. And lastly, Sleepless Sentry makes it so they are active for a longer duration. Arctic Spear with Beauty of Hope to apply weakness stacks. This makes it so we can't freeze enemies since we don't deal frost damage. If we have the perfect gear with all the damage increases needed and additional sacred damage to spells, then you don't need to go for this. Boon of the Usurper and Ominous Chill modifiers makes it easier to apply those stacks. And the last point does not matter, nothing increases our ailment damage and our spell damage is pretty abysmal. I don't recommend using Comet though, since it makes it harder to hit your target. Also, the weakness stacks increase our poison and bleed damage. And the shock deals a little bit of damage, but it does not scale with Immortal Offering. Next up, Winter's Grasp, converting it into shadow damage with concentrated shadow so we can apply Curse. This is for crowd control, since Curse will transfer any ailments to targets around. Other modifiers I'm using are Rime World, Ice Porn, and Permafrost for utility. You could also use Immortalized Perfection with the shadow conversion. This will increase curse time instead of freeze. And Admire from a distance is also viable if you prefer. Next skill, Mark of Impurity, increases our ailment damage with Defect of Creation and Big Game Hunting. Weight of Infamy triggers our passive node. And Guilt by Association is for large crowds, so we only need to curse one enemy. There would be another ailment node here, but we don't need the increased ailment chance. And the last skill, Ether Jump with March of the Time Devourers and Escape Artist for utility. The other two modifiers are Spirits of the Void and Fragments of the Ether. They each only apply one stack of stasis, even with increased ailment stacks applied. I don't know why, this is probably a bug, but yeah, that's why we pick up both. Attributes. Everything into Wisdom because we want the ailment chance score we get from it. It starts to fall off the higher you go, but we are still investing everything because it's our highest value, which makes it our primary resource, so we get 0.5% damage increased per point. Passives. First of all, ailment crit does not work, so we are not picking up Primordial Insight. That is probably a bug as well. And secondly, elemental ailments like shock and burn are not affected by Immortal Offering. I don't know why they don't scale with it, but it makes those way weaker than poison and bleed. That is the reason why I don't focus on those, even though there would be also damaging ailments. All the other points are focused on giving us either increased damage or increased ailment damage. Nothing else that has specific damage increases scales ailments. For example, melee weapon damage, projectile damage, or attack damage all don't work with ailments. Starting off in the Scholar tree, the only route from the center where we gain ailment and normal damage. Picking up maximum resources for our Manic Slaughter. Into the Kabbalist, picking up these two nodes for increased maximum stacks, as well as Immortal Offering for more damage. Picking up any ailment damage node we can get. And grabbing Grievous Afflictions so we can apply 2 ailments at once. Power of the First Man gives us a chance to double our stacks applied. I have 5 stacks applied per proc, and that proc has a 50% chance to apply 10. Any of the following damaging nodes can be swapped out for Insidious Decay if you do not have gear with ailment stacks applied. Making our way down into the Warmonger, grabbing Manic Slaughter. Into the Ranger tree for Persistence Hunting and Meditative Focus. Making our way further down into the Warlock for maximum resource, comboing with Manic Slaughter. To the Praetorian for Retaliator. As you can see, all those smaller nodes give increased damage, scaling our ailments. That's it for this guide. This was the most difficult build I've done so far. Figuring out the scaling on this build took me forever. So please, if you appreciate the time and effort I put into this, shoot me a like. Also, I hope I earned your subscription. More Wolcen content coming in the future. Being a content creator was always a dream of mine, but to be honest, I'm hitting an all-time low at the moment. I've been streaming for 2 years now with almost 3,000 hours in. And it's just not going anywhere. But anyways, I'll leave you with more gameplay. Hope to see you in the next one. Servus YouTube.